All right, let's get started here. Once again, thank you so much for joining us on your lunch hour today for this discussion on AI and implications for public policy. This is a special co-hosted Theory to Practice and panel series event in partnership with the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance and the Information School. For the Evans School side, this is Theory to Practice. It's an ongoing series of discussions hosted by the Evans School that brings together academics and researchers at the UW with practitioners in the field to explore key policy, governance, and social sector topics. The iSchool panel series shares the expertise of iSchool community members on relevant and engaging information topics. Just want to, before we begin, start our time here with an acknowledgement that we acknowledge the Coast Salish people upon whose land we study and work here at the University of Washington. Their ancestors have resided here since time immemorial, and they continue to live in this place today, deeply rooted in their cultural traditions. We also acknowledge that this country was built from the land theft and genocide of indigenous communities and enslavement and enforced labor of Black people. I know these acknowledgements are a small gesture, but in making them, we recognize our responsibility to learn and share this history and to build relationships where together we can create just public policy. So I want to, having said that, turn us to the topic of our forum today, and just a couple of logistics items here. We are using the webinar format today. Please feel free, as I mentioned, to add your questions using the Q&A function throughout. Just pop them in and we'll make sure to get to them as we can towards the end of our time here. We're looking forward to kind of a free-flowing dynamic discussion as we move back and forth between questions and the Q&As that have been submitted. First, with introductions, my name is Ray M. I'm the Director of Development here at Evans School. I will be moderating this discussion today and not just playing the role. It's not a far stretch to say I am the admittedly curious, uninformed participant here today. I know there are friends of Evans School and friends of the Information School joining us. I would lean towards our Evans School friends and say, beyond asking ChatGPT to help me with this prompt, very unexperienced in the world of AI. So I'm looking forward to learning alongside everyone here today. I want to introduce our wonderful panelists here. We have Afra Mashadi and Justin Bullock joining us. And Afra, I'll throw it to you to just let us know a little bit about yourself, areas of focus for your work, and just a bit of your journey into this world of AI.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here as a panelist today. So I'm an assistant professor of computer science at the University of Washington, Bothell, and adjunct at Information School. My journey to where I am currently starts from very non-academic path, where after I finished my PhD and postdoc, I actually worked for 6 years in industry, industrial research in Bell Labs, known as, blue sky research. And so I've seen a lot of insight of how companies are working towards the technology and what actually drives those motivations. And after that, I actually worked for about a year as a consultant for United Nations, completely opposite extreme, seeing how, you can use data and computer science and machine learning technology for human good and to the purpose of really getting something out there for society. And then I joined University of Washington. Since then I've been here. And I think a lot of my journey of academic journey and what I currently work on in my research lab resonates with my path of coming from technology background, but trying to understand more about how is this technology going to impact people is it designed and created to include everybody as part of society? Is it fair? Is it, take into account all the type of different biases that can emerge in the design and implementation of it? So that's my background, and I pass it to Justin.
Yeah, it's nice to see you again, Afra. And thanks for that introduction. I didn't know you had worked with the UN. That's really cool. So I'm Justin Bullock. I'm an associate professor affiliate at the Evans School. My background is in public policy, public administration, and governance. I've been really interested in complex systems. They're usually looking at complex service delivery systems. So some of my early work was on the U.S. unemployment insurance program and understanding how its design and incentives create challenges for its implementation, and then what kind of changes we get when we add a whole array of automatic systems and technological systems embedded in those systems. So I did a lot on public management, public administration, and maybe 2014, 2015, was introduced to some of the challenges with artificial intelligence and its continued pathway of evolution, and got really interested in what might be the consequences for public organizations specifically first. And as these tools have some skills and some limitations, what would it do to decision making by government? And still very interested in that, still looking into that. Also gotten interested into just the broader role that both AI tools are playing throughout the economy and throughout other types of organizations, and then how we might govern them, or how we might regulate them or control them as they do become more effective and more integrated into our other institutions. And I've done a decent amount of work in the academic public administration and public policy sphere on these questions, and have two recent books looking at these that are non-academic books. One is an extended conversation with ChatGPT back in December, kind of testing its behavior, and then another is a book called Conversations with a Machine Oracle, and another one it's in the science fiction realm called Low Wainwright, where I take some fictional science fiction liberties with challenges that AI and nanomaterials might take. So been interested from the public policy space and how these tools might change how these organizations make their decisions, how we might regulate and control AI, and then kind of experimenting with it a little bit along the way.
Thank you so much, Justin, for sharing your background. Afra, thank you so much for telling us a bit about yourself, sharing your background as well. Our time is limited, and from our discussions, planning meetings, I know that the unlimited amount of time could be spent on this topic. So I want to jump right into a few topics and questions for Afra and Justin here. Justin, you mentioned regulation, and there's, upon looking up developments, articles, there's just a million things. It's impossible to see what is current right now, but something that I think is just from yesterday, a report that the White House has invited executives from Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, Microsoft, OpenAI, to discuss AI issues. This goes right into kind of the spheres of your work, Justin. And the question is, what type of processes, regulatory processes, should there be in releasing new AI tools, technologies, really products? What should the role of government be in this process? And for this report, it was Joe Biden's stated expectation that the quote is, "Companies like yours must make sure that products are safe before making them available to the public." So that's the question I wanted to throw out to both of y'all. What should the role of the government be in this process?
Well, maybe I can start, Afra, and then I'm sure you have some thoughts on this as well. So it's a difficult question, is the first piece, which is one of the reasons why regulation has lagged a little bit in this space. These are, new types of tools that we're still learning a little bit about their behavior, a variety of AI tools, but particularly the large language models. And regulation can lag what's going on in innovation and development in the marketplace. So that's kind of the situation now. And right now, for the last, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years, there has been an increased discussion around the social harms by AI. And this goes back to thinking about algorithmic harms, which is kind of got popularized across the use of them in social media and the use of them in law enforcement for surveillance. And so the regulatory space is still playing a little bit of catch up of what should we do about those types of AIs or those types of algorithms, and had some limited success. There's more recently, I guess, particularly in the European Union, is making some progress with the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and now with their EU AI, that's giving some framework for these things. But in general, the US has lagged behind regulations directed at algorithms and also regulations directed at data privacy and data protection, just generally speaking. So, we're still playing catch up from the most recent wave of algorithms being integrated into society in ways that were harmful. Had some benefits too, of course. Social media has lots of benefits, I think, but lots of costs, specifically to some subgroups, but maybe to all of us as well. And the conversation most recently has been around these large language models. And really this, I think, launched with ChatGPT late last year, kind of into the mainstream public consciousness on this. And then GPT-4, which is a slight extension of the ChatGPT program, or a big extension, depending on your viewpoint, was released about 2 months ago. And these models have some kind of similar problems to the algorithmic problems of recent times, in the sense that we still have all these concerns about data, these concerns about privacy, and these concerns about bias and how they interact with the human networks that they're embedded in. And there is some current attempts right now to regulate these or include these new types of models into the regulation. So the EU AI Act just had some recent modifications where they're including the large language models potentially as high-risk systems, which is where they should be, in my opinion. And then you do see some discussion at the federal level in the US for trying to address the risks of large language models specifically. There has been an ongoing conversation in the US around data privacy and data protection, kind of in this previous form of AIs and algorithms. But with the large language model that they've gotten the whole general public's attention, from what I can tell, and senators have been tweeting about it. And as Ray mentioned, we learned maybe 48 hours ago or 24 hours ago that President Biden is gathering the heads of a few of the lead players. I believe Alphabet and Microsoft and OpenAI have all been requested to come participate in a dialogue with the president about what these regulations should be. One final thing I'll say is that it's interesting in the tech world, I think, and maybe I'll hand it off to you from here to speak to this a little bit. But my understanding is that Alphabet and Microsoft and OpenAI, who are playing some of the lead roles here, want regulation. They want to find an agreed upon rules of the game that doesn't have them giving poor incentive from when to deploy these models and cutting corners. They want to have some agreed upon rules of what these models should be able to do before they're released, what it means for them to be accountable, what it means for them to be audible, what it means for them to be fair, what it means for them to minimize bias. And so it's good that those players are coming together and talking about it, and we'll kind of see. But I think I took more than my fair share of the time. So go ahead, Alfred.
Thank you, Justin. Yeah, actually, just to echo back on what Justin was saying, I think for us to understand regulation, for me, the very first thing is that for these regulations to be in place, we need to understand what we are trying to regulate. And people usually think about these different things in silos, we have data, now we have AI. Well, this is the same consequence of the same pipeline. For many years, there's been challenges about privacy, laws of data. We as audience are all guilty of, many years of scrolling down on the terms and conditions and accepting without really meaning to accept. So this is a consequence of what's happening now with these different intelligent models that could actually leverage that data to learn a specific property and a specific task. One thing I want to also mention about this is that, and comes from one of my colleagues at RAISE, is that if you want to regulate something, we really need to know what it is we're regulating. And talking about artificial intelligence as AI is really a very abstract thing to say, right? So I'm really glad that in the past few months or so, people are more and more talking about large language models and refer to them as large language models as opposed to AI, because these are very specific capabilities. Knowing that something is just a language model, that it has just consumed the entire web to learn about how to actually respond, is very different from saying that this model has actually intelligence, has actually is a general artificial intelligence. And I think to become more, so as Justin was saying, regulation is something that is being, we're kind of catching up with when it comes to the technology domain. But I feel like it is true that if we think about this as a whole entire thing, package of data, and coming with some specific type of models like large language models, then makes you think about, yes, why we are well behind because of regulations, privacy regulations have not been as harsh as it is perhaps in Europe with the GDPR. And I do think that, yes, there is good intent. Probably the companies would like to, form a way to actually have some sort of regulations on that. But then yet again, there are a lot of privacy issues with GDPR that these big companies like Facebook or Meta are facing in Europe. So when it boils down to them being held accountable, is that really something that they would want to pursue or not? So we don't know yet. This is down the line.
I wanted to follow up on a couple of themes that I was honing in on. I know that both Afra and Justin, you two have been in the space for years. Justin, you had mentioned thinking about this in 2015, right? This the implications of AI or large language models. I'd love to just get into sort of the pace, this idea of the pace of the regulation of AI, large language models versus the actual development of those things. Love to hear kind of your experience on how that evolved, how quickly it accelerated, as far as the time that you've been working on these issues, and maybe some solutions or steps that you might envision that would help to more quickly develop regulations at the federal, state, and I know in discussions, the problem, especially at the local level of regulating these sorts of products. Love for y'all to speak to some of that. Afra, maybe I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, actually, this is a very good point, because I think as a person coming from technology, the pace of large language models, their progress was really shocking. I had conversations with my students even a year ago saying that, no, this would not happen. It's not going to be that good, It's not going to be as good as what we currently have with the large language models. So I think when the technologies are taken by surprise and how well these tools are, you can only imagine how it's going to be the consequence of understanding what type of harms they're going to have. So I think the hardest part for us is really to understand what type of harms they can cause, these specific models, and then what type of regulations we should have around that to prevent those type of harms. And one of the biggest challenges I see with that is that because a lot of these efforts are done primarily by companies that can afford it, right? So you have these large initiatives like OpenAI and Microsoft also putting money into that, or Google version of that. So that kind of excludes the outside community, the research community, who is usually from academia, is the critics of these kind of models and have some sort of understanding into what type of harm they can cause, how to prevent it, what to advocate for. So I feel like a lot of academics feel left out. We have no way or transparency into these models or resources to compete with them. And as a result, I feel like a bridge that can sit between companies and regulatory practices is usually when you have people from academia to give some consultancy to the regulators. And if we don't have that, if we don't have those expertise in, one of the best universities in the United States, if we feel like, well, we don't know like what's happening with these models and we're taken up by surprise, then it's actually going to be really difficult to catch up with those regulatory practices. And I leave it to Justin to talk more about the regulation process.
And I want to just throw in a quick, as Justin, as you answer, maybe your experience or knowledge of sort of bridges like Afra described being developed, if that exists, if it's being developed. That's just part of something to keep in mind as we hear from you as well.
Yeah. So I would echo Afra's thoughts just about the pace of technological innovation in this space, and it does seem that people that have been working in computer science for a while were surprised by the capability of the most recent large language models, and the pace of innovation within computer science, both from a hardware perspective in terms of just total amount of compute capacity and the cleverness of algorithms or new architecture styles that give us impressive outcomes, suggests a world in which we may be surprised again and again moving forward, and that does make regulation hard. It is a slower process than regulation, hardly linear progress, whereas technological stuff is often exponential in its growth. So yeah, there is this divergence of the pace of technological innovation and regulation. The other thing that Afra mentioned that I'd like to just note that makes this kind of a special challenge case is that pretty much all the work at the leading edge is being done in private companies right now. And in the past, when we had powerful new technologies, it was almost always the case that academia was playing a large role, and the government too, for that matter, developing these things and pulling resources together. And not that mistakes weren't made or there weren't some weird incentives there, but those were the actors. And the private company played like a contracting role, definitely played important roles, but they were not taking the lead. And this is also happening arguably in the case of space exploration now in a weird way too, where private companies are taking the lead on innovation in this space, and it leaves us with questions about how to regulate and how to ensure that it's socially acceptable and that it's ethical in its behavior when those actors aren't at the table. So from the big picture, like development space, it's really concerning because these companies at the top right now, at least all from squinting and looking at them, I think aren't deliberately trying to create harmful things. They're trying to create things that generate profit, and then as by byproduct might do some harmful things. But because their eyes are set on, generally speaking, profit, and the other people aren't at the table before deployment, and in fairness, some of these companies that have released the large language models did some of this kind of red teaming or trying to make sure that the software was aligned in a way that was good, or did spend some time internally and with trusted experts trying to shape these most recent large language models in a way that they wouldn't do shitty things or crappy things, and yet they still do. They still do have you can do prompt injections to them to get them to do and say things that go outside of their guardrails. They do still exhibit lots of the biases that we find in our regular structured society. So all those things are part of it, and it's not clear that without academia playing a major role, or democratic government that the incentives are created in such a way that these models are thoroughly inspected before they're released to be an experimentation on all of us. So that takes us to the question of, what should regulation look like? There are some interesting proposals that I think get into some of the details, but generally speaking, we need something along the lines, I think, of a licensing process, which is there's only a handful of entities that can make these particular, if we're talking about large language models specifically, there's only a handful of entities that can develop these products, as Afra mentioned, and they're the type, they have the models that are the most powerful. And so you could require them to get licensing from some regulatory entity that has a set of checks in their regulatory scheme of, does it do what it's supposed to do? Does it go off the rails? How can we track its behavior? How can we know its behavior? Do detailed, both kind of like observing its behavior, but diving into its internal structure before it's allowed to be released, say, publicly available. And that would be one, I think, that's what most people are talking about in this space. Now, what all those specific details look like matter. And to Alfred's point earlier, maybe the companies don't really want to get on board with regulations to have the kind of piece that us as the general public would want, but some type of licensing strategy before, like, the research can be done, but before it's deployed into the wild. The other interesting piece that maybe Afra could speak to or would have some thoughts on as well, but there are some concerns about this, these types of models, these large language models having more and more access to underlying computation, and that their behaviors are such that it's hard to predict what the next type of behavior is going to be, which makes regulation hard. It also maybe presents novel risks. And so there's this idea that we should regulate or track the amount of computation power that that companies are using on the front end to do training, and either limit that or also have some type of licensing or monitoring for the same companies that are using large amounts of compute. I think you were looking for stuff at the local level. I just went with things more at kind of the federal or global level. It does present all kinds of challenges for local government, because these will just, the ChatGPT, Claude, other, Sydney, I think, is the one with Bing. They have problems, and we can talk more about them, but they also do some things pretty powerfully and can change the structure of work within jobs and across jobs. And so, local governments in particular, who deliver a lot of our, basic services and basic utilities, it seems to me that these types of models are going to provide ways to increase efficiency, decrease cost, maybe even have the cost, the actual capabilities of the task be done more reliably. So there's going to have some, there'll be some pressures there to adopt these, to make use of those, just like we have with other digital tools in local government. And it's going to present these real nuanced, hard questions about which types of tasks do we want an AI system to do, no matter how clever it is, versus which ones do we want a human to do.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, just like to go back to something that Justin mentioned, I think another thing about regulatory processes, we also need to think about the existing infrastructure that is there. So there's been a lot of effort that's been done to, implement GDPR. It's a lot of many years of work that went to those coming up with that framework of privacy framework. But that also, with the new AI models and large language models, we're going to have a lot of problems with the existing solutions that we have. So, for example, one of the things as right to be forgotten, right? So if you can claim that you want your data to be removed from a certain entity, they're responsible, they will be held responsible, they should remove your data from their however they have collected it and maintained it. So that's something that Europe actually enforces quite strictly as part of the GDPR. But then the consequences of large language models or any other type of models that is trained on people's data is that what if I don't want that training to be my data be part of that training, right? And that's something that, okay, you can remove your data, but what if the model is already trained? So it has learned some information about, whatever is the context of that model based on your data. And the right to be forgotten becomes extremely challenging because you cannot say, I want to untrain this model and retrain it again without this person's data. This is a model that has taken like a lot of information in to be able to work such that it actually produces like plausible output. So I think the current existing infrastructure is also going to suffer with such large language models, and thinking about how again, like thinking about like data, privacy of the data and these models as like literally same organ. You cannot think about a person's head without thinking about their body. This is like the same thing, and how to actually create new practices around that would become very important.
I had like a million questions as I was listening to y'all's discussion, but I did want to jump to a couple of themes that were thrown out, a few times about bias that might be built in or perpetuated in models and tools like this. Afra, I know that you have had areas of your work, especially in the Seattle area, focused on this issue. There's much being discussed about bias in AI and concerns that whether these tools may perpetuate or amplify already existing biases, as they're kind of calling information, collecting whatever already exists. I'd love to hear your experience on that, Afra, your work, and then concerns and solutions being proposed in that area.
Yeah, sure. I'll be upfront. Probably haven't talked too much about the solution, but I can definitely say a little bit about things that we have done. So we have done some projects with Seattle Parks and Recreation, trying to understand how people visit, nature and green spaces within Seattle and Washington State. And so we've been looking at different modalities of the data. Obviously, having survey data is very difficult and expensive to have somebody in the parks counting people. So we've been looking at social media for that a lot. There are a lot of practices that show that social media is a good proxy for people visitation to places. And we wanted to see if we look at, like, for example, images that people post on Instagram, can we actually count the number of people who appear in those images? And these are public images that are posted publicly. So looking at, for example, AI image processing models, taking different ones and looking at, can we actually rely at this information, having some ground truth from Seattle Parks and Recreation and knowing the visitation counts. We found out that there are actually quite a lot of biases that surface. Partly, interestingly enough, a lot of criticism for image processing and face recognition softwares talks about race and gender. We actually found that it wasn't as bad as we thought in counting people from diverse background of skin color, but we found that actually almost all the time kids are excluded. These models are not designed to be able to detect children. And that actually makes you wonder, and I don't know if anybody has tried, like if you go to OpenAI and try to create, OpenAI has a DALL-E 2, which is like creates images for you based on a prompt. And if you try to create a picture of a person, it does pretty well. If you tell it to like create a picture of a kid, it completely fails to be able to recreate facial features. It just looks like a completely blurred face. So I think part of that comes from understanding of, okay, how these models been trained and who they can include. And if you are to use this as a pipeline for a policy, can we rely on this information accurately? So for us, like children being a huge, participants, audience of parks and playgrounds and so on, they cannot be excluded from this kind of accounting. So this is just one example. Face recognition models have been criticized for a long time. from academia. And one of the reasons for that is because of the transparency, in a sense that we knew what type of databases they've been trained on, because they were all made available public. They're mostly trained on images that are available on internet. So we know that they do have these limitation. And a lot of that has happened by people accidentally finding, okay, well, look, this didn't work for me. Let me see how it is, and finding and recovering these biases. My fear is that moving forward and not looking at where we are today, but where we're going to go in future, this is going to become a lot harder to have like whistleblowers who are going to find out that there are actually like biases happening within these systems. From a technological perspective, I actually think that a lot of these models will move towards a decentralized way of being trained. That means that the data would not be on internet anymore. The data would be on people's possessions, on their smart devices. Your smart device is powerful enough to actually train parts of these large language models. So the transparency would become harder and harder. So we wouldn't be able to say anymore where the bias exists, what is actually causing the bias. We would just know that somewhere in this pipeline, there is something going wrong. And I think talking again about like practices and regulation in this, I think like one of the things that we need to do is to think about academics as marathon runners who are coming to warn the society that something is going to go really wrong, especially if you are from the tech background, you know what is the direction that the technology is going, and then having some sort of a regulatory framework that would hold companies accountable to that, and at least like slow down the pace of progression. Sometimes a slowing down is actually could be an answer for everything else to catch up with.
Yeah, thank you. I did mention at the top that I wanted to leave some space for some guest or audience Q&A, but I think there is a great question here that is a perfect segue. But this one sort of leans more to the personal, everyday use offer. You mentioned data and owning that data and being kind of having more agency. But this, Justin, I'll throw this out to you. It's kind of related to health and safety, but here's a question. Is it possible to avoid AI until the safety guardrails are in place with legal consequences for damaging impact? For example, are there any secure search engines that are putting users first and not integrating AI until further regulations or safety guardrails? Or is AI already embedded in all search engines? Is there much discussion or research on the physiological impacts that AI might have? How do we protect ourselves? That was a huge question, but I think that last sentence sums it up. Like, in our everyday experience, are there ways to sort of safeguard ourselves from these effects? Might be on.
No, I don't think so. I mean, and maybe Afra knows of some things, but I mean, if you're it's what makes this space, I guess, in need of regulation. You cannot engage in the world around you without being exposed to these tools, influenced by these tools. I joke to the policy students sometimes that we're basically already cyborgs in some meaningful way, because you couldn't go to graduate school without spending hours and hours and hours staring at a computer screen, and that being a large part of how you spend your time and what you do. And you're not like absent if you're trying to protect your own personal data, your location, what you do with your time, it's unclear to me that you have those tools. And even your location, I mean, there's from a satellite perspective and the images that are taken of the globe, it would be hard to hide your general location. So yeah, I don't think there's any way to exit from engaging with these tools in any real cultural way. And so yeah, I think it's one of the strongest arguments for the importance of regulation in this space, and all the checks and balances that Afra and I have been talking about, because I don't think you have any way of opting out.
Afra, did you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, I
Good
also
answer.
agree. I don't think there's a way of opting out. I think it's something that, same thing as how you were using like search engines before the large language models came out. I think very soon we will forget about how primitive we were using like search engines. But the idea is that I think just being aware that these models are labeled under artificial intelligence, but it doesn't mean that they do have an intelligence. It's just a large language model. And I think awareness of public, knowing that what is actually like how we don't know about how these models are created in a sense, but we know about some of their limitations. They just like have digested the entire web and they're like summarize it and giving something back to you, right? So thinking about in your daily interactions on what you are getting from these models might actually not be a really like a global perspective or a correct or even correct information is very vital while the regulatory processes work their way towards having some sort of a standardization in that space.
I mean, that's a great segue. There's another great question. That wasn't a very hopeful outlook on this for me. And I told you I'm sharing sort of, or assume I'm sharing some position with a lot of our Evans School friends who are joining us here today. But on the flip side of things, these models as a tool, the question is, how could the public sector use these models, not just in terms of regulation, but apart from regulation, what guidance might you have about adopting the use of AI, large language models in the public sector? And what are some of the most promising ways in which these tools can be used to improve government service delivery, regulation, decision making, et cetera? So on the flip side of for using the tools for efficiency, for good, for work in the public sector.
I can go first if you like, Afra. So one thing I want to point out is, a lot of it depends on what we call AI. As we mentioned a couple of times, we're talking specifically about large language models. There's an interesting recent corollary of kind of underlying algorithmic tools, which is thinking about the benefits to using social media and the benefits to crowd intelligence from local government, trying to find ways to gather different types of information at a different scale and be able to analyze it all more quickly, and has its own kind of blind spots and selection bias and challenges. But in a lot of cases, local governments have found ways to get much more quality feedback, and both from like say physical infrastructure stuff, but also when people in the community are concerned about something. And so that's one of the things they did with social media. Before that, it was adopting computers and the internet, and the way in which that reshaped local governments from being what we traditionally thought of as like street level bureaucrats out in the community to more often behind their screens, and having something that in our literature we call like a screen level bureaucracy, where people are administering a lot of government work from behind a screen. So large language models, specifically, I think, we really talked good about their concerns, and I think we should keep one foot in that firmly. But they're also incredibly powerful. I've been using them to think about how to do different types of policy analysis, for example. So you can start from basic, like, here's a challenge going on in my community or in my state or in my country. Here are the parameters. What do you know about these things and how they fit together for like the early brainstorming phase of some problem to get your head around it? So stuff like that is from like a brainstorming phase, I think super helpful. The other two that I can imagine are chatbots that are with some type of fine tuning or some type of additional prompt could be trained on a more narrow set of things, so they can still communicate very powerfully, but is reined in a way that responds to your questions about local government services, for example, in a way that previous chatbots haven't been able to do so. And we're seeing some initial attempts at integrating large language models into agent models where they're able to have a to-do list that they go search and execute and create things for, and while querying the internet. And so you can imagine some set types of research being and some types of tasks being done that way. And the other piece is going to be, I think, for education. There's an interesting TED Talk out now. This came out, I think, yesterday or the day before. The gentleman that runs Khan Academy was going through what they've been able to do with large language models and tailoring education and tutoring. And you could imagine the government, local governments, state governments, I mean, we already do it through higher education, but directly making these kind of tools for the citizens for continuing education and continual learning. So I think the other thing that I was going to say is ChatGPT in particular also has this new feature, I forget what it's actually called, Codex or something like that, where you can upload raw data and tell it to do regressions and tell it to create visual aids to represent data in some new and interesting way. And it seems to me that that's a lot of things that local government pay a lot of analysts to do, sometimes well and sometimes not, that it gives you a wider array of tools to do those types of things. It should stay away from surveillance, and it should stay away from policing, and it should stay away from community care for a long time. And those things should be done by humans and then with lots of people at the table. But in some of these areas, I think there's a lot of benefits.
Yeah, I agree. I actually like this conversation to kind of finish also in a, optimistic view. This technology can be very powerful. I think integration of this technology into our day-to-day jobs hopefully would tend us to be more optimized, work on things that we can do better as humans, like creative solutions, and integrate the part of learning that we need to do. I encourage my students to use ChatGPT to learn things that they didn't think they can actually have access to. So I think it's going to just look very different from how we do our day-to-day jobs these days. I'm hoping secretly that it would drive us towards 4 days working day. So we would have 3 days weekend. They're trying in some parts of Europe to do that and see if it's beneficial or not. But I do think that having the right tool with the right, regulatory processes integrated into our day-to-day jobs is going to be something that can really, really empower our day-to-day works. And I mean, if you have used it for learning something, if you have used a large language model to just tap the water, learn about something different, you've seen that how kind of exciting it is, because it's just the way that is communicated and the way that you can pick up that information fast can really help you grow as a person, right? In a new area. So I think that our jobs are going to get more integrated with AI over time, and how we will handle that and what it would feel like. Well, we don't know. I don't know. I wish I knew. I would make some profit based on that, but I don't know.
Well, there are so many follow-ups again, but I wanted to throw this kind of final question out to both of you to sort of close out our discussion time, and just thank you so much for just being a part of this. Thank you so much for lending your experience, expertise. But here's a question that thrown out to both of you. Just one piece of advice that you would give related to not just AI, but large language models, tools for anyone working in the public sector right now, and then going along the lines of kind of the use of these tools. What's an important resource that you would recommend to engage in these discussions, in these ideas, in this whole sphere? So just one piece of advice you'd have for folks working in the public sector related to this, and then a resource you would recommend. And for me, I'm selfishly asking for the one where I can give it my to-do list and it just accomplishes it. but I can just chat offline with y'all for that one. Afra, can I throw that to you first?
I was going to say Justin should go first.
I'm happy to go first.
I just copy him.
I'm happy to go first. Yeah. So my piece of advice is to play with these models. You can they get open source very quickly, and even if you're not a computer programmer or a novice, or you know, not a novice, but the opposite of a novice, an expert in these things, ChatGPT you can play with just to get a sense of what it might do. And then the second piece I would say is then, you know, go actual search what you learn. It does give you a nice overview of some topic, but it does get some of the details wrong too, like specific citations, specific examples, specific books. So, you know, play with it and then go back to traditional search engine and see for yourself what the strengths and weaknesses are. And for a resource, I'm going to plug my own work on this. We have a Oxford Handbook of AI Governance that is in its final stages. It's out there in the world, not as like a physical book, but as a collection of 49 essays. And we look at from a government and technology standpoint, how can governments use these tools, and how can we use different types of governance strategies to regulate these tools. And it's a lot of what we've been talking about. So I would recommend that. And now, Offer, you can also recommend my book too, if you want to copy my answer.
If I get a signed copy.
Deal.
So I actually really liked your answer, but I'm not going to copy it. I'm going to be creative. So my advice is do what you're doing now, which is like, you know, you have your lunch time and it's sunny in Seattle at least, and you came to listen to us. So I think just, you know, being involved with type of conversations, listening to what people from different areas of technology and public policy think, and just being aware of changes that are happening is really important. Obviously, I say that, but I also feel like every day there's a new progress. It's such a fast pace of innovation that makes it hard to stay on top of things, but just, you know, being part of these forums, like if there are, like you see that sometimes there are letters going around asking for things to be signed just to put more focus on regulation, push companies, be part of that. Is always important to have people's voices heard on that. I do have a lot of resources based on data ethics and what the data scientists should do, what they should consider. And because I think of this whole thing as one pipeline, I can share those resources with you through our lovely hosts that have offered to send the resources afterwards. So I would share those with you. But I think a lot of the things is that also exploring those tools, as Justin said, just knowing that where they fall short, what it works for, what it doesn't work for. So
thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. We did. I just noticed someone in the chat mention it's important to bear in mind, I'm quote, to not throw any organizational confidential information into ChatGPT. Is that a piece of advice and a general guideline? These not playing. This is a genuine question for me. Is that a piece of advice that we all steer clear of here as folks tuning in?
I think the answer is yes, unless it's a partnership your company has engaged directly, like as an enterprise level thing. At the individual level, the ChatGPT specifically warned you basically about this, that your conversations can be reviewed. So with that one in particular, definitely not until you have some kind of agreement with your company so that they know that people at OpenAI could, and it's a really small likelihood, but could be reviewing your specific prompts.
Well, thank you for sort of saving me there on the practice side of things. I just so appreciate both of you, your openness and willingness to engage and part of my fear, it came true of us just having so limited time to dive into this topic. But thank you so much, Afra, as you mentioned, being willing to pass along resources, ways to continue staying engaged. Justin, as well, thank you so much for sharing what you have and being willing to continue to engage even after this event. For folks here, just thank you so much for joining us. Like Afra mentioned, it's sunny outside. The weather is beautiful. Thank you for taking your lunch break to be here with us. Afra and Justin, once again, thank you so much for just your commitment to engage and to just share your experience in this emerging world. And for folks here, just a couple of announcements. We will have this recording up sometime in the next week. You'll get a link to it as well to review. We'll also be sending a takeaway document. We've been sort of harvesting some of the resources and links, articles mentioned, questions that were surfaced here. We will send that out to folks as a takeaway. Continue to stay engaged. I know there are so many questions that we didn't get a chance to get to, but Justin and Afra have agreed just to engage in this discussion and topic and world. So thank you so much on behalf of the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance, on behalf of the Information School. Thank you for being here. We hope to see you at the next Theory to Practice, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ray. Thanks,
Thank
Afra.
you. Bye. Thank you.